fault. Sorry. That'll be at the end. There's a right time for everything. Well, thank you so much for everyone that shared today in the service. It's just, I feel like God is bringing all the things together. That He's the one that has a message for us this morning. I know that Sean and was it Luke, they didn't know anything about what I'm going to talk about, but so many things just tied together. I wanted to tell you the story of Esther, and I'm sure you've heard this story before. But she came at an amazing time. We're talking about time in different ways this morning. And God has a time and a season for each one of us. And I love what you shared about wanting each one of us to be a disciple and walking closer with Jesus. And that there's purpose for each one of our lives right here in the time, in the place that we're at right now, here in Montague, here in Prince Edward Island, here in Canada, and in this time in history, there's purpose for us. So if you have your Bibles, I'm just going to be kind of skipping through and telling the story more than reading it. But Esther is before Psalms and before Job, is the book of Esther. But the timeline of Esther she lived after King David. So Israel in the Bible was God's chosen people. But like us, sometimes they wandered away, or quite often they wandered away, and they got distracted, and they got involved in a lot of different things, and they started getting their eyes off of God, and they started, in the Old Testament it would be like worshiping different gods, but here in our society, we don't have idols really set up on our mantle or TV or something. But other things can be idols in our lives. Anything that we put ahead of our God, which could be, you name it, anything. Sports, TV, money, power, just list a whole bunch of things that we can put in our lives ahead of God. And so the Israelites turned away from God. And God kept calling them back, sending so many prophets and people to say, I love you, please come back to me, please honor me with your life, please give me your heart, and acknowledge that I am the true God. And they just kind of were blinded to that. And finally God said, okay, you're not going to listen. And so he said, okay, you're going to go into captivity in a different land. God had brought them to the promised land. He had given them so many amazing things. He had provided fields and vineyards and things that they hadn't worked for, and yet they were going to have to lose all of that before they could realize to turn their hearts back to God, the true God, because He's more important than anything in our lives, even the things that we have and the things that He's given to us. I pray it wouldn't take us that long if we're wandering away from God, that it wouldn't take us to lose everything, to turn back to God. But this is what it took for the Israelites. And so they went into captivity in another land, in Babylon. And God gave them promises even in that land. He said, I'm going to bring you back. I'm going to restore you. I'm going to take care of you in this land. And Esther is this beautiful story of God taking care of His people, even though it looked at the beginning like it was very bad. And so there was this king called Xerxes, and he was a major king in that time. He ruled over all of India, a lot of the Middle East, and part of Africa. He had 127 provinces that he ruled over. He was a powerful man, and he was very rich. And he decided to throw a party, and that was a big party. He invited all the officials from these 127 provinces to come to his land, and he wanted to celebrate the wealth and show off, basically, and throw this big party. So that was, the wine was flowing freely, etc., and he was drunk one night, and he invited his queen to come to the main party because he wanted to show her off. And she refused to come, which honestly don't really blame her. It would be like, when you're not drinking, we'll talk. But anyways, so she refused to come, and this was a big deal. So she got dethroned. That queen's gone. I'm shortening the story and putting it in modern English. I hope that's okay. And so they needed a new queen for the king. You can't have a king without a queen, really. And so all the land, these 127 promises, they sent out all the messengers to find the most beautiful virgins in all the land and bring them to the palace. So that's a lot of women in these 127 promises, from India all the way to Africa and the Middle East. They brought them there to the palace, and they were going to do a whole year of beauty treatments. And so if they weren't beautiful before, they were going to be they were going to be really beautiful after all this whole year of beauty treatments. I wish we had more time to talk about all the intricacies of this story, because it's amazing how there's parallels that God wants us to prepare our hearts to worship the King and to be part of beautifying our souls and letting go of bitterness and unforgiveness and going through the process of entering in more into his presence. So Esther was one of these young women that was brought to the palace because the Bible says she was very beautiful in face and in form. And that was the purpose of God in Esther's life. Being beautiful was part of the purpose that God had for her, because beauty isn't always a good thing in every situation. I think our culture kind of idolizes that, but it can be a hindrance in some ways, in some situations. But Esther needed that beauty for God's purpose in her life. And so she won the favor of everyone that saw her. And when she went to the king, he had one night with each one of these women, and he would pick which one he thought he wanted to be the queen. And so Esther won favor of everyone that saw her, and she won the heart of the king in that one night. And he said, I want her to be my queen. And so Esther was raised from this place of being kind of a nobody to being queen of the palace. And now Esther was God's choice in that time because she was a Jew, but that was hidden from the palace, because to be a Jew in that situation in Babylon, they were really looked down on. They were not, they were persecuted, they were made fun of, everyone was an enemy of the Jews. And so they hid the fact that Esther was a Jew, but she was raised by Mordecai, was her uncle. Her parents had passed away, and Mordecai played an amazing and major role in her life in raising her up in the things of God. And it's amazing when you understand this story is that it was already quite a few generations that they'd been in Babylon. Mordecai was a great grandson of someone that came from Israel, and so they had hung on to the promises of God. They had made disciples of the next generation. They had raised up the children to believe in the true God. And so Esther found herself in the palace. And Mordecai was outside the gates, and he was an official person outside the gates. And there was a guy that was the second in the kingdom, and his name was Haman. And it came to his attention that everyone would bow to Haman when he walked by, except Mordecai. Because Mordecai said, my heart belongs to God. I will bow only to God, the true God. And so Haman didn't like this very much, that everyone was bowing to him and Mordecai was not. And so he said, I'm going to make an end of this Mordecai. And while I'm at it, I'm going to make an end to all the Jews, because he found out that Mordecai was a Jew. And so he said, I'm going to just eliminate the Jews. Eliminate. And so he went to the king, made a request that the king would make a decree that they would eliminate the Jews, that people that were the enemy could just randomly start killing the Jews on a certain day. And this is devastating. Can you imagine if someone gave a proclamation that all the Irish would be gone? That would be me. I'm half Irish. It sounds ridiculous now, but that was the decree that was made. And so Mordecai went to Esther. She's the queen in the palace. And he says, you have to do something. You're a Jew also. Do you think that because you're in the palace, you're going to escape this fate. They'll find out, and it will affect you as well. And he says something key. These words stick in my heart a lot. He says, who's to say that you came to this throne for such a time as this? God had already planned that Esther would be in the palace. God already knew that this devastation was going to be occurring, and he had made a way already for a rescue of his chosen people. And she said, but how can I go to the king? I mean, this is a tough guy. If you go to this king and nobody's invited you to go, you could be killed. And the other queen was gone. And so I could lose my life by going to the king and asking him any petition. And she said, okay, you fast. Fast and pray for me, and I'll go to the king, and I'll ask him the request to save my people. So they fasted for 3 days. They prayed. She invited the king to a banquet with Haman also. And she didn't make her request even that day. I don't know if she lost her courage or she was planning to already do a second banquet, but she said, okay, come again tomorrow and I'll ask you my request. And he said, anything, even half of my kingdom. So can you imagine getting half of all of India, part of Africa and the Middle East? I mean, that's a pretty good deal. She could have asked for anything. But she said, please, will you give me the life of my people and my life as well? We've been sentenced to die by being persecuted and killed. And the king said, who would do this? Who would be so wicked to do this? And she said, this was Haman. It was him that made this decree into law. And so it ended up that Haman was the one that got killed. And they wrote a new decree that the Jews could fight back, that if their enemies were coming to kill them, that they could fight back, and they could take the plunder of their enemies. And God actually worked it out that the Jews ended up a lot more powerful, more blessed by all the plunder that they received. And Mordecai became the second in the kingdom. And the story is amazing because Esther was in the palace for such a time as this. I kind of just gave you the quick rundown of the whole story of Esther, and you probably have heard it before. But the words "for such a time as this" are so key for us. They're key for my heart, a key for our hearts, because we are each placed in this time for such a time as this. What is the need? What are the needs in the community around you, in the people around you, in the next door neighbors, in the city around you? What are the needs in your family? For sure, you're placed in that place for such a time as this. And through this story, God is calling us to pray. He's calling us to open our eyes to the needs around us, to be able to have a heart that doesn't say, I'm going to look after my own interests. I'm going to take care of my own back. Or Esther could have lost her life. But she said these words, if I die, I die. I need to go and do this thing, for God has called me to do this. I'm paraphrasing. But she said, if I die, I die. She said, I have to for such a time as this. For such a time as this. A little 6-year-old boy looks up at the ceiling, the kind of faded paint on the walls and peeling paint, and he's covered with a multicolored blanket, and it keeps him warm at night. It's wool. It gets kind of cold at night, and he is trying to go to sleep, but he can't, again, for so many nights in a row. And you'd think that he should hear a lullaby, something singing him to sleep, but instead he hears the arguing words through the paper-thin walls, and he hears the angry voice of his father, and then he hears a smack, and he knows what happens then the next day his mom will say she fell in the night, but he knows that's not true, that she didn't fall, that his father is again doing things that a father should not do or a husband should not do. And he's seen it with his older brother, but he's just 6 years old, so it hasn't happened to him yet. He's kind of a favorite, but he's worried about his younger sister as well and what will happen in a few years. And Marco is his name, the 6-year-old boy, is so filled with anger and bitterness already at 6 years old at seeing this anger of his father and seeing the abuse of his family, that he prays a desperate prayer. He's so filled with anger that he has such hatred toward a man that should be showing him love and showing him what it means to be a father. But all he can feel is hatred toward this man that has shown hatred and bitterness toward his family. And he prays a prayer and he says, God, please kill my father. And we think, oh my goodness, how could that emotion be so strong? But for anybody who's been a part of any kind of abuse, that the feelings that well up of just trying to escape, trying to do something, trying to get away, trying to find a solution to get out of it are so strong. And that's not something a 6-year-old boy should feel. But Marco prays this prayer. And then 3 days later, there's a knock at the door. And someone comes to bring the news to their family that the father has been killed. There was a bad business deal, and there was angry words shared, and he was killed in the scuffle of that bad business deal. And Marco sits on the couch and on the chair. He tries to think, what should he feel then? Because he doesn't really feel sad. It's almost like just numb or not knowing what to think or what to feel. He doesn't know if he should cry. He doesn't really feel like crying. He feels almost a little bit relieved. But he doesn't know what the future will hold. His mother is in shock as well, and she has some tears, which Marco doesn't really understand why she would be sad. He would think that she would be relieved as well. But he didn't understand that now she doesn't have a job, and she doesn't have any way to provide for their family. And in the next days and weeks, the community feels very badly. People walk by and they offer words of comfort to the family, but the community doesn't have money to give to the family either. They're all just earning the money that day that they can use to buy the meals that they have for their family that day. They don't have any extra to give. And so one day, another knock comes at the door, and Marco opens the door, and a lady is standing there with a big smile on her face, and she says, Marco, is your mother here? And he says, yeah, she's here. And his mother comes out. She says, we want your children to be part of the compassion program. And their eyes light up because they've heard of some other kids that have been part of the program before. And Marco doesn't understand what it all means. But he goes to the local church the next day, and he starts to hear about what it means to know Jesus and this man, Jesus, that died for him, that died to forgive him, that died to heal him of the bitterness in his heart and the anger. Because Marco was kind of blaming himself that his father died because he prayed the prayer that his father would die. And so he had a lot of emotions to try to work through. And Marco learned and grew in the program. He had a meal each day with the program in the workers, the local workers that knew his own language, many of them that came from the same area that he lived in. And Marco learned about Jesus. He learned to recognize diseases in his family, and if he wasn't feeling well, he had medicine that he needed. And he also got to see a really nice professional lady that came every month, and he would be able to talk to her about all the feelings inside of his heart. And they called her a psychologist, and he could talk through what it meant for the impact for their family. And he could play games like soccer. He learned that he had somebody in a different country that loved him and gave him some extra funds that he could buy a soccer ball to play with at recess, or when he's at home on the street, they had a ball to play with. And he learned what it meant to be a disciple of Jesus. And Marco grew up, and he decided that he wanted to become an accountant. And he's an accountant for a Compassion Project now in Nicaragua. And I met Marco in February this year in Nicaragua. And he was the one that told me his story. He started out, I was 6 years old, and I wanted to kill my father. And I just wept because in a lot of ways, I've felt some of those strong emotions in my own life and my heart, but I couldn't even imagine the times magnified of a little boy going through all of those things in his life. But to see him and his face shining with the love of Jesus, because you'd think that someone would grow up and be kind of bitter and angry at the world that he didn't have a father, or angry that he lived in such poverty. But his face shone with the love of Jesus, and no bitterness, no anger in his heart. He's worked now for several years in the Compassion Project as an accountant, and he's now taking extra Bible courses so that he can lead a Bible study in their area. And he speaks of his mom with shining and glowing praise, because she went back to school and she learned a skill and got a job and worked their kids through the school process, along with the sponsor from Compassion that helped with all of the things like the medical and the food and the education and the discipleship of Jesus. And Marco's life has been transformed, and now he is transforming the lives of the children around him and the generations for such a time as this. In Nicaragua, we went into a home, a little girl, her name is Elizabeth, and we heard her story. And we found out that she didn't have a sponsor, and I'm thinking, I already sponsored kids, and I'm just at my limit. God, what can I do? I want to take care of this little girl. And the people that were with me, Randy and Donna, they said to this little Elizabeth, "We want to be your sponsor." And her face just lit up with such joy, because now she had a sponsor. If I had the ability to take you with me to a different country, to one of the 26 countries around the world that Compassion is in, and sit you down in the living area of the family and have you hear the stories for yourself, I would love to do that. But today I come on behalf of those children. And I know for myself, sometimes when I hear things on TV, or there's another organization and they're asking for donations or something else, and I feel like, another thing, I'm just giving so much, what can I do? But then I stop and say, wait a minute. For such a time as this, God, help me to do what I can for the people around me, for the ones that you have called me to do. And I've explained a little bit about Compassion in the time that we have. But the more I find out about them, the more I love this organization, and I'm impressed with the integrity and the openness that they have. I've walked into projects in different places of the world, almost unannounced, and it's the same in every country. They welcome you in. They say anything you want to see or ask, any projects or children that you want to visit. We're happy for you to come. And maybe someday you can also go with compassion to a different country and see for yourself. I know there's a lot of needs in the people around us as well. But I feel like it's the commission of Jesus. That's why he came. He said the Son of Man didn't come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. And then he told us, go into all the world and share this good news, this gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ, which is even more than just salvation for eternity. It is hope and help and life for right now. Because it wouldn't work so well if I just told someone about Jesus and they didn't have enough food. Or if I gave them food and I never told them about Jesus, I still wouldn't be benefiting them. So compassion does all of these things. Just have a short video and then we'll close the service. If God is laying this on your heart, I'll just come back and talk for about a minute and then we'll close. Will you show the video, please?
I am Jennifer Gitiri and I'm from Kenya. Growing up with a single parent in the slum was very, very difficult for me. Really living hand to mouth, because if my mom went to look for employment or even wash other people's clothes, if she came in the evening with $1, that's what we would use to buy a meal and eat at that particular time. If we wake up tomorrow, there is nothing to eat, then we'd take a glass of water and run to school. But Compassion opened a project at a church near our home. And for the first time as a young girl, I saw hope. Compassion provided for everything. They gave me books. When I was sick, Compassion would pay for my medical care. And I'm also thankful to my sponsor, who was very, very encouraging. Just writing letters of encouragement, telling me that you can make it, you can do it. Your past should not determine your future. I believe my sponsors were God sent.
When we wrote to Jennifer, it was important to let her know that we really cared about her. I just said what a mother would say. We're so proud of you. We're so proud that your grade card is good and that you've done such a good job.
I remember vividly, our neighbor's child was raped. The child was 10 years. And these were the kind of things that I saw growing up that really made me decide to be a lawyer. Someone who could speak for the rights of those who cannot speak for themselves. The beginning of this year, I joined the Kenya School of Law so that now I can be admitted into the bar and become an advocate in the High Court of Kenya. This summer, I went to the United States of America to be an advocate. I shared passionately about my story and how my sponsors had made a difference in my life, and they were brought on stage.
Here they are.
It was life-changing just to see those two people who'd sacrificed their resources, who used to pray for me, who used to encourage me. So for me to see these two people was just amazing.
Compassion gave us the opportunity to reach halfway around the world to rescue one little girl from whatever the future might have had in store for her.
It makes me cry all the time when I think of how far God has brought me, from the ditches of poverty to this.
That indeed compassion releases children from poverty in Jesus' name. My children will never live in poverty. My children will know the word of God. And when I look at the package and the compassion book, my heart is broken. Because 17 years ago, my face was in that packet.
For these kids, it's like a parent. It's $41 a month. If God is speaking to your heart, you can change the life of a child, and that child goes on to change Kenya, becoming a lawyer, becoming nurses and doctors and teachers. God bless you.